Picture this. You're standing in the pouring rain in a town you've never seen before, with $3 to your name and nowhere in the world to go. Then a complete stranger walks up to you and says 5 words that will change your life forever. Marry me for my daughter's sake. That's exactly what happened to Clara Stone on a storm-soaked afternoon in Broken Creek, Colorado territory, when desperation met opportunity in the most unexpected way possible. But this isn't just another tale of frontier marriages or convenient arrangements. This is the story of how two broken people discovered that sometimes the most practical decisions lead to the most extraordinary love. Clara had lost everything: her husband to a ranch accident, her home to unpaid debts, and her place in the community to whispers about what a proper widow should and shouldn't do. When she stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a worn carpetbag and fading hope, she wasn't looking for romance. She was looking for survival. And Ezekiel Holloway? He was drowning. 2 years after losing his beloved wife Sarah to fever, this widowed rancher was watching his 2 little girls, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Lily, struggle without a mother's care. Emma, serious beyond her years, was trying to be a little mother to her sister, which wasn't fair to either of them. Lily, all sunshine and giggles, was growing up without the guidance only a woman could provide. When Zeke looked into Clara's tired eyes that rainy afternoon and made his desperate proposal, he had no idea he was asking the one woman who would transform his broken family into something stronger than any of them had ever been alone. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't passion or poetry that brought them together. It was need, pure and simple. Clara needed a home and security. Zeke needed help raising his daughters. What neither of them expected was how 2 motherless little girls would become the bridge between 2 wounded hearts. They didn't expect 8-year-old Emma, with her fierce protectiveness and desperate need to matter, to teach them both what it means to choose family over blood. They didn't expect 6-year-old Lily, with her gap-toothed grin and absolute faith in happy endings, to show them that love doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it creeps up quietly, wearing flour-dusted aprons and work-worn hands, until one day you realize the stranger you married has become the person you can't imagine living without. This is the story of how a handshake agreement became a love story for the ages, how a desperate proposal turned into the foundation of the most loving family any of them could have imagined, and how sometimes when you stop looking for fairy tale romance and start looking for real partnership, you find something even better than happily ever after. Because when Ezekiel Holloway asked Clara Stone to marry him for his daughter's sake, he had no idea he was asking the woman who would teach them all what it really means to be a family. The stagecoach pulled into Broken Creek under a sky the color of old pewter, rain drumming against the canvas roof like impatient fingers. Clara Stone pressed her face to the small window and watched the town materialize through sheets of water, a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the vastness of Colorado territory, as if seeking comfort in each other's proximity. She had exactly $3.27 in her reticule, a change of clothes in her carpetbag, and nowhere in the world to go. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd come to a place called Broken Creek when everything about her own life felt shattered beyond repair. "End of the line, folks," called the driver, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Broken Creek, Colorado territory." Clara gathered her meager belongings and stepped down into the mud, immediately soaked to the skin, despite the driver's attempts to shield her with his coat. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple, hurried toward the shelter of nearby buildings, but Clara stood frozen in the downpour, suddenly paralyzed by the reality of her situation. She had no plan, no prospects, no idea what she was going to do next. "Ma'am, you all right there?" The voice belonged to a tall man in a worn brown coat who'd appeared beside the stagecoach as if from nowhere. He held a wide-brimmed hat over her head, though it did little to protect either of them from the driving rain. In the gray afternoon light, she could see he had kind eyes the color of summer sky, dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar, and the weathered look of someone who spent his life working with his hands. "I'm fine," Clara lied, clutching her carpetbag tighter. "Just getting my bearings." He studied her with the careful attention of someone accustomed to reading situations quickly. You got somewhere to go? Someone meeting you? The question she'd been dreading. Clara lifted her chin, trying to summon some semblance of dignity. I'm quite capable of managing on my own, thank you. A flash of lightning illuminated his face, and she saw something that looked like understanding cross his features. Yes, ma'am, I'm sure you are. But this storm's not fit for man nor beast, and you're soaked clear through. Name's Ezekiel Holloway, but most folks call me Zeke. Why don't you let me help you find someplace dry? Clara hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that accepting help from strangers often came with expectations she wasn't prepared to meet. But the rain was coming down harder now, and she was already shivering in her thin traveling dress. Mrs. Henderson runs a clean boarding house just up the street, Zeke continued, as if sensing her reluctance. Good woman, fair prices. I could walk you over, make sure you get settled proper. Thank you, Clara managed through chattering teeth. That's very kind. They hurried through the muddy streets, Zeke keeping his hat extended over her head, while the rain soaked through his own coat. The boarding house was a two-story building with yellow lamplight glowing warmly in the windows, and Clara felt a surge of relief at the sight of it. But her relief was short-lived. After speaking with Mrs. Henderson, a plump, kindly woman who clearly wanted to help, Clara learned that even the most modest room would cost $200 a night, with meals extra. Her $3 wouldn't stretch far enough to matter. I'm sorry, dear, Mrs. Henderson said gently, clearly reading the despair on Clara's face. If you were staying longer, we could work something out, but for just a night or two. Of course, Clara said quickly, backing toward the door. I understand completely. Thank you for your time. She was halfway to the door when Zeke's voice stopped her. Mrs. Henderson, might I have a word with the lady? In private? The older woman glanced between them, then nodded and bustled away, leaving Clara and Zeke alone in the boarding house parlor. He turned to face her, his expression serious but not unkind. I don't mean to pry into your affairs, ma'am, but I get the sense you're in a difficult spot. Clara's cheeks burned. My circumstances are temporary, Mr. Holloway. I'll find employment, or what? His question was gentle but direct. Forgive me for speaking plainly, but you look like someone who's been carrying a heavy load for too long. And this town, well, it's not easy for a woman alone, especially one without connections. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into the nearest chair, her composure finally cracking. I'm a widow, she said quietly. My husband died 8 months ago in a ranch accident. There were debts. I lost everything. The people I thought were friends. She trailed off, unable to voice the betrayal that had driven her from her last community. Zeke pulled up a chair and sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. I'm sorry for your loss. That's a hard road to walk. Thank you. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her display of weakness. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You're a stranger. Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to, he said simply. Less complicated. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain against the windows. Then Zeke cleared his throat. Ma'am, Mrs. Stone, is it? I've got a proposition for you. Might sound strange, but I'd ask you to hear me out. Clara looked up, wary. What kind of proposition? Zeke ran a hand through his damp hair. I'm a widower myself. Lost my wife, Sarah, to fever 2 years ago. I've got 2 little girls. Emma's 8, Lily's 6. Good girls, but they need a mother, someone to look after them proper, teach them the things a father can't. Clara's heart clenched at the mention of motherless children, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry for your loss as well. The thing is, Zeke continued, I've been trying to manage on my own, but it's not working. I can't be in 2 places at once, and the girls, they're suffering for it. Emma's trying to be a little mother to Lily, which isn't fair to either of them, and I'm drowning trying to keep up with the ranch work and still give them what they need. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I need help, Mrs. Stone, and from what I can see, you need a place to belong. So here's what I'm thinking. Marry me. For my daughter's sake, and for your own security. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon? I know it sounds crazy, Zeke said quickly, but think about it practical like. You'd have a home, security, purpose. The girls would have someone to care for them properly. It wouldn't be, that is, I wouldn't expect. We'd be partners, nothing more. A business arrangement. You're proposing marriage to a woman you met 20 minutes ago, Clara said faintly. I'm proposing a solution to both our problems, Zeke corrected. I've got a good ranch, steady income, and two little girls who deserve better than what I can give them alone. You've got experience running a household, I'd guess, and you need somewhere safe to start over. Clara's mind reeled. It was the most outrageous proposal she'd ever heard. It was also, she realized with growing despair, probably her only real option. You don't know anything about me, she said. What if I'm a terrible person? What if I can't? What if the children don't like me? Then we'll figure it out as we go, Zeke replied. But I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I can see you've got a kind heart. The way you talked about your losses, that's not the way a selfish person speaks. He stood up and extended his hand. I'm not asking you to love me, Mrs. Stone. I'm asking you to help me raise my daughters. In return, I'll give you a home, security, and the respect due to my wife. It's not romantic, but it's honest. Clara stared at his outstretched hand. This morning she'd been on a stagecoach to nowhere, with no plan and no hope. Now a man she just met was offering her everything she'd lost. A home, a purpose, a place to belong. Your daughters, she said slowly. What are they like? A smile transformed Zeke's face, making him look years younger. Emma's serious, responsible, sometimes too responsible. She thinks she has to take care of everyone. Lily's the sunshine of the family, always laughing, always finding something to be happy about. They're good girls, Mrs. Stone. They deserve someone who'll love them proper. And you think a stranger can do that? I think, Zeke said carefully, that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born into. Clara looked around the boarding house parlor, at the warm light and comfortable furniture that represented everything she couldn't afford. Then she looked at Zeke Holloway, the stranger who was offering her a lifeline she hadn't dared to hope for. Tomorrow. Clara's entire life could change tomorrow. She thought about Emma, 8 years old and trying to be a mother to her little sister. She thought about Lily, 6 years old and growing up without the guidance only a woman could provide. She thought about herself, 29 years old and completely alone in the world. Mr. Holloway, she said, looking him straight in the eye, I accept your proposal. His smile was like sunrise after the storm. Thank you, Mrs. Stone. I think this might be the best decision either of us has made in a long time. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling under a pale sun. Clara stood before the cracked mirror in her boarding house room, trying to make herself presentable for what would undoubtedly be the most important day of her life. Her hands trembled as she pinned her dark hair into a neat chignon, and she had to pause twice to steady her breathing. In less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Ezekiel Holloway. By afternoon, she would be stepmother to 2 little girls she'd never met. The enormity of what she was about to do threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed the panic down. She'd made her choice, and there was no going back now. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Stone? It's Zeke. You ready? Clara took one last look at herself in the mirror. She wore her best dress, a simple blue wool that had seen better days but was clean and mended. Her wedding dress, she thought with a mixture of irony and sadness, so different from the white silk and lace she'd worn when she married Robert 12 years ago. I'm ready, she called, opening the door. Zeke stood in the hallway, hat in hand, wearing what was clearly his Sunday best. A black suit that was well made but showed signs of careful maintenance. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline marked by a small scar near his left ear. You look very nice, he said simply, and Clara found herself grateful for his lack of flowery compliments. This was a business arrangement, after all. Thank you. As do you. They walked to the church in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalks. Broken Creek was coming to life around them, shopkeepers opening their doors, children playing in the streets, the normal rhythms of a frontier town. Clara tried to imagine herself as part of this community, but it felt as unreal as a dream. The church was small and simple, with rough-hewn pews and sunlight streaming through plain glass windows. Preacher Wilson was a thin man with kind eyes who asked no uncomfortable questions and seemed to understand that this was a marriage of necessity rather than romance. Do you, Ezekiel James Holloway, take Clara Elizabeth Stone to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? I do. Do you, Clara Elizabeth Stone, take Ezekiel James Holloway to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. There was no kiss, no passionate embrace. Zeke simply took her hand and squeezed it gently, a gesture that somehow felt more meaningful than any romantic gesture might have. Thank you, he said quietly, for taking this chance. Thank you, she replied, for giving me one. The ride to the ranch took an hour through rolling hills dotted with cattle and framed by distant mountains. Zeke's wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, like everything else she'd seen that belonged to him. He was clearly a man who took care of what was his. Tell me about your daughters, Clara said as they bounced along the rutted road. What should I know before I meet them? Zeke was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. Emma's the older one. She's serious. Been trying to be the mother of the family since Sarah died, which isn't fair to her. She might be suspicious of you at first, not because she's unkind, but because she's protective of Lily and of me. That's understandable. Lily's different. She's all sunshine and chatter, curious about everything. She'll probably take to you right away, but don't let that fool you into thinking she doesn't miss her mama just as much as Emma does. Clara nodded, her stomach tight with nervousness. What have you told them about me? The truth, mostly. That I met a lady who needed a place to belong, and we needed someone to help make our house a home again. That we're getting married today, and you'll be coming to live with us. How did they react? Zeke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Emma asked if you knew how to cook. Lily asked if you liked dolls. Despite her nervousness, Clara found herself smiling. What did you tell them? That they'd have to ask you themselves. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a neat house with a wide porch, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and well cared for, the kind of place that could be a real home with the right people in it. Two small figures sat on the porch steps, clearly waiting for their return. As the wagon drew closer, Clara could make out their faces, one serious and watchful, the other bright with curiosity. Her new daughters. Remember, Zeke said quietly, they're just as nervous as you are. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and both girls stood up, moving to flank their father as he helped Clara down. In the afternoon sunlight, she got her first clear look at Emma and Lily Holloway. Emma was tall for 8, with straight brown hair braided neatly down her back and her father's blue eyes. She stood with her shoulders squared, one protective hand on her little sister's arm. Everything about her posture said she was prepared to defend her family if necessary. Lily was smaller and rounder, with curly blonde hair that escaped from its braids and hazel eyes that sparkled with interest. She bounced slightly on her toes, clearly fighting the urge to rush forward. Girls, Zeke said, I'd like you to meet Clara. She's my wife now, which makes her your new mama. The word mama hung in the air between them, loaded with hope and grief and uncertainty. Clara's heart clenched as she saw Emma's jaw tighten and Lily's eyes grow wide. Hello, Emma. Hello, Lily, Clara said, keeping her voice gentle. I'm very pleased to meet you both. Emma stepped forward slightly, still protective but clearly the designated spokesperson. Did you really marry our papa today? I did. Why? The blunt question might have seemed rude, but Clara heard the underlying fear in it. This child had already lost one mother. She needed to know that the new one wasn't going to disappear just as suddenly. Because your papa is a good man who asked for my help, Clara said honestly, and because I think you and Lily deserve someone who can take proper care of you. We take care of ourselves, Emma said, a hint of defiance in her voice. I can see that. You've done a wonderful job. But everyone needs help sometimes, don't they? Before Emma could answer, Lily broke free from her sister's restraining hand and stepped closer to Clara, tilting her head back to study the new adult in her life. Do you like dolls? She asked seriously. Clara crouched down to bring herself to eye level with the little girl. I do like dolls. Do you have some you'd like to show me? Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. Oh, yes. I have 3, and Emma made clothes for them, and one of them has real hair that you can brush. I'd love to see them, Clara said warmly, and I'd love to see the clothes Emma made. That sounds very skilled. For the first time, Emma's serious expression softened slightly. It's not that hard. Mama taught me before she got sick. The mention of their mother created a moment of awkward silence, but Zeke stepped smoothly into it. Why don't we all go inside? Clara should see her new home. The house was neat, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was sturdy and well made, but there were no curtains at the windows, no decorative touches, no sense of warmth beyond the basic necessities. It was the home of a man doing his best, but clearly out of his depth when it came to creating comfort. This is the kitchen, Zeke said unnecessarily, gesturing to the large room that dominated the main floor. A massive cook stove took up one wall, with a long wooden table in the center and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. It's wonderful, Clara said, and meant it. The kitchen was 3 times the size of the one she'd had in her last home, with good light from large windows and plenty of room to work. Emma does most of the cooking, Zeke continued. She's gotten pretty good at it, but I can't reach the high shelves, Emma finished. And I can't lift the big pots when they're full. Clara nodded seriously. That sounds frustrating. Maybe we could work together. I could handle the heavy things and you could teach me how you like things done. Emma looked surprised by this suggestion. Most adults, in Clara's experience, expected children to step aside and let the grown-ups take over. But this child had been carrying adult responsibilities for 2 years. She deserved to have her contributions acknowledged. Would you like to see the rest of the house? Zeke asked. The tour continued through the front room with its massive stone fireplace and comfortable chairs, then up the stairs to show her the bedrooms. The girls shared a room at the back of the house, with 2 narrow beds and a collection of toys and books that spoke of a father who tried to provide whatever his daughters needed. This is the master bedroom, Zeke said, opening the door to a large room at the front of the house. It'll be yours now. I've moved my things to the small room across the hall. Clara was grateful he'd anticipated the awkwardness of sleeping arrangements. The bed was large and comfortable looking, with a patchwork quilt that had clearly been made with love and skill. Did their mother make this? She asked, touching the intricate stitching. Yes, Sarah was handy with a needle. Clara smoothed her hand over the quilt, thinking of the woman who had slept in this bed, loved this man, raised these children. She had beautiful taste. I'll take good care of it. Something in Zeke's expression relaxed at her words. Perhaps he'd been worried she would want to erase all traces of his first wife. That evening, as they sat down to their first dinner as a family, Clara felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes watching her every move. She'd cooked a simple meal, beef stew and cornbread, but it felt like the most important dinner she'd ever prepared. This is really good, Lily announced, taking another spoonful. Different from Emma's, but good different. Thank you, sweetheart, Clara said, touched by the child's easy acceptance. Emma was more reserved, but Clara caught her nodding approvingly when she tasted the cornbread. Mama Sarah used to make cornbread like this, she said quietly. Did she? I'd love to know her recipe sometime if you remember it. I have her recipe book, Emma said, her voice growing slightly warmer. Maybe I could show it to you tomorrow. I'd like that very much. As they prepared for bed that first night, Clara tucked both girls into their beds, unsure of the protocol but following her instincts. Lily demanded a story, which Clara provided about a brave little princess who tamed a dragon with kindness. Emma listened from her own bed, pretending to be asleep but clearly hanging on every word. Will you still be here when we wake up? Lily asked sleepily. Clara's heart broke a little at the question. Yes, sweetheart. I'll be here. Promise? I promise. Later, standing on the porch with Zeke under a canopy of stars, Clara reflected on the day's momentous changes. "They're wonderful girls," she said softly. "They are. You handled them perfectly. Not trying too hard, but not holding back either." "I was terrified I'd say the wrong thing." Zeke was quiet for a moment. "Clara, I want you to know, if this doesn't work out, if you're not happy here, I won't hold you to the arrangement. You're not trapped." Clara turned to look at him in the moonlight. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "Lord, no. Today went better than I dared hope. But I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel you have to." Clara considered his words. Did she want to stay? A few days ago, the question would have been purely practical. But looking at this good man who was giving her a chance at a new life, thinking about Emma's cautious trust and Lily's eager acceptance, Clara realized her answer wasn't just about survival anymore. "I want to stay, Zeke," she said quietly, "for all of us." As she prepared for bed in her new room, Clara thought about the strange turns life could take. This morning she'd been Clara Stone, a desperate widow with no prospects. Tonight she was Clara Holloway, wife and mother, part of a family that needed her as much as she needed them. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but as she drifted off to sleep, Clara thought it might just be exactly the life she was meant to have. Clara woke to the sound of hushed voices and the smell of something burning. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was or why unfamiliar voices were drifting up from below. Then memory rushed back. She was Mrs. Ezekiel Holloway now, in her new home, with her new family. And something was definitely going wrong in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Zeke standing helplessly in front of the stove while smoke poured from a skillet. Emma was near tears, frantically waving a dish towel at the smoke, while Lily sat at the table, looking both fascinated and concerned. "I was trying to make breakfast," Emma said miserably as Clara appeared. "I wanted to let you sleep, but I burned the eggs and now everything's ruined and—" "Hey," Clara said gently, taking the skillet off the heat and opening the kitchen windows to let the smoke out. "Nothing's ruined that can't be fixed. We've got more eggs, don't we?" "Yes, ma'am," Zeke said, looking relieved to have someone take charge. "Plenty of eggs. Then we're in good shape." Clara surveyed the kitchen efficiently. "Emma, why don't you slice some bread while I start fresh eggs?" "Lily, can you set the table?" "I can help," Zeke offered. "You can help by going out and doing whatever you normally do in the mornings," Clara said with a smile. "Let us women handle breakfast." As Zeke headed out to tend to the animals, Clara began cleaning up the breakfast disaster while directing the girls in their tasks. Within 15 minutes, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and bacon instead of smoke, and Emma had stopped looking like she wanted to cry. "You're not mad?" Emma asked hesitantly as she arranged sliced bread on a plate. "Why would I be mad?" "You were trying to be helpful. That's never something to be angry about." "But I made a mess." Clara paused in her egg scrambling to look at the girl seriously. "Emma, can I tell you something? In my 12 years of marriage before, I burned more meals than I can count. Your papa's probably going to eat plenty of burned food from me too, because that's what happens when you're learning to cook for new people." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" "The trick is to learn from each mistake and not be afraid to try again." When Zeke returned from the barn, he found his family sitting around a table laden with fluffy scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and fresh bread with butter and jam. The morning light streaming through the windows gave everything a golden glow, and for the first time in 2 years, his kitchen felt like the heart of a home again. "This looks wonderful," he said, taking his seat. "Emma helped," Clara said quickly. "She's got good instincts. She just needs a little more practice with the timing." Emma beamed at the praise, and Zeke felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Clara hadn't been here even 24 hours, but already she was doing something he'd failed at for 2 years. She was making Emma feel like a successful part of the family instead of a child struggling with adult responsibilities. After breakfast, Clara announced her intention to tackle the house from top to bottom. "Not because it's not clean," she assured Emma, who had taken on most of the housework since Sarah's death, "but because I need to learn where everything is, and the best way to do that is to touch every single thing." What followed was part cleaning frenzy, part treasure hunt, and part family bonding experience. Clara found Sarah's recipe book tucked away in a kitchen cupboard and spent an hour going through it with Emma, discussing which dishes were family favorites. She discovered a trunk full of fabric scraps in the upstairs hall closet and suggested they could be used for a new quilt or more doll clothes. When they cleaned out Sarah's dressing table, Clara handled each item with reverence, asking Emma and Lily if they wanted to keep their mother's jewelry box, her silver brush set, her small collection of precious things. "You can have them," Emma said, but Clara shook her head. "These belong to you and Lily. They're part of your mama's legacy to you. I'll just make sure they stay safe until you're old enough to decide what to do with them." The real test came 3 days later, when Lily woke up sick with a fever and stomach upset. Clara found her crying in her bed at dawn, hot and miserable, and immediately went into the kind of calm, competent action that marked an experienced caregiver. She moved Lily into the master bedroom so she could monitor her more closely, set up a schedule of cool cloths and small sips of water, and sent Zeke into town for the ingredients to make a healing broth her own mother had used. When Emma hovered anxiously, clearly terrified of losing another person she loved, Clara gave her important jobs: fetching clean cloths, reading to Lily, helping make the special broth. For 3 days, Clara barely left Lily's side. She slept in the rocking chair beside the bed, woke every few hours to check the child's fever, and somehow managed to keep the household running while nursing Lily back to health. Zeke watched it all with growing amazement. Clara approached motherhood the same way she approached everything else, with quiet competence, endless patience, and an instinct for what each person needed. She never got flustered, never made Emma feel like she was in the way, and never made Lily feel like her illness was a burden. On the third night, Lily's fever finally broke. Clara was changing the sweaty sheets when the little girl grabbed her hand. "Mama Clara?" she whispered. Clara's heart stopped. It was the first time either child had called her anything but her first name. "Yes, sweetheart. I love you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Lily. So very much." From the doorway, Emma and Zeke watched the exchange, both with tears in their own eyes. Emma crept closer to the bed. "Mama Clara," she said tentatively. "Yes, Emma. Thank you for taking care of her, for taking care of us." Clara opened her free arm, and Emma crawled into the bed beside her sister, letting herself be held for the first time since her own mother's death. "That's what mamas do," Clara said softly. "They take care of their children, no matter what." The crisis had cemented something in their little family. The girls began calling her Mama Clara naturally, without awkwardness or hesitation. Emma started sharing stories about Sarah that she'd kept locked inside, trusting Clara with precious memories. Lily began including Clara in her elaborate games and schemes, but it was Zeke's reaction that surprised Clara the most. She caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something warmer than gratitude, deeper than appreciation. When he looked at her now, it wasn't just as the woman who'd solved his childcare problems. It was as someone who'd become essential to his family's happiness. 2 weeks after Lily's recovery, Clara was working in what had once been Sarah's garden when Emma found her. "Mama always said that garden was her favorite place," Emma said, settling beside her in the dirt. Clara sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. "I can see why. It's beautiful, even overgrown like this." "Are you going to change it?" There was something careful in Emma's voice. "What do you mean? Are you going to plant different things? Make it look different?" Clara understood then. This garden was one of Emma's last tangible connections to her mother. "I'd like to plant the same things your mama grew," Clara said carefully. "Maybe add a few new things around the edges, but keep her plants in the center. What do you think?" Emma's relief was visible. "I think she'd like that. She always said a garden should grow and change, but keep its heart the same. Your mama was a wise woman. Will you teach me how to take better care of it? I tried, but some of the plants died, and I didn't know how to fix them. I'd love to teach you. We could work on it together." For the rest of the afternoon, Clara and Emma worked side by side, Emma sharing memories of helping her mother, while Clara shared knowledge gained from years of keeping her own garden. It was peaceful, productive work, and by evening they'd made real progress in reclaiming the space. That night at dinner, Emma surprised everyone by saying, "Mama Clara and I are going to fix Mama Sarah's garden together." The casual way she'd linked the two names, Mama Clara and Mama Sarah, spoke volumes about how this wise little girl had found a way to honor her birth mother while accepting her new one. That sounds like a fine project, Zeke said, his voice a little rough with emotion. And when it's all fixed up, Lily added, we can have picnics in it like we used to with Mama Sarah. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. 3 weeks ago, she'd been alone and hopeless. Now she was sitting at a dinner table with people who called her Mama, making plans for family picnics in a garden she was going to restore, with a daughter who trusted her with precious memories. Later that evening, after the girls were tucked safely in bed, Clara found herself alone with Zeke on the front porch. They'd fallen into this habit, ending each day together, sharing coffee and comfortable silence while the stars appeared overhead. You know, Zeke said eventually, when I proposed to you, I thought I was asking for help with practical things. Cooking, cleaning, keeping house. And now, Clara asked softly, now I realize I wasn't just asking for a housekeeper. I was asking for a partner, someone to share the weight of raising two little girls, of building a life worth living. Clara sipped her coffee, thinking about his words. When I accepted your proposal, I thought I was just trading domestic work for security. And now? Now I realize I wasn't just accepting a job. I was accepting a chance to be part of something bigger than myself, to matter to people who matter to me. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Bessie the cow lowed in response from the barn. Clara, Zeke said eventually, his voice careful, do you think, that is, are you happy here? Really happy, not just making the best of things? Clara considered the question seriously. Was she happy? 3 weeks ago, she would have said happiness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival was all she'd been aiming for. But now, yes, she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I'm happy here, Zeke. Happier than I've been in a long time. Good, he said simply, because I'm happy too. Happier than I thought I'd ever be again. As they prepared to go inside for the night, Clara realized that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. They'd started as strangers making a practical arrangement, but after 3 weeks of shared meals, domestic cooperation, and the intimacy of caring for a sick child together, they were becoming something else. They were becoming a real family. And maybe if she was reading the signs correctly, they were becoming something even more precious than that. She was beginning to think that two people who'd given up on love might actually be falling into it, quietly and naturally, one ordinary day at a time. 6 weeks into their marriage, Clara faced her first real test as Mrs. Ezekiel Holloway when Zeke announced they'd been invited to the Hendersons' harvest dance. The whole community will be there, he explained over breakfast, watching her carefully for a reaction. It's the biggest social event of the season. Music, dancing, plenty of food. The girls always look forward to it. Clara's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she kept her voice steady. That sounds wonderful. Emma looked up from her eggs, excitement bright in her eyes. All the ladies bring their best dishes, and there's a competition for the prettiest dress, and Mr. Patterson plays his fiddle so everyone can dance. And there's cake, Lily added enthusiastically. Lots and lots of cake. Clara smiled at their excitement, but her mind was racing. She'd been dreading this moment, the first time she'd have to face the community as Zeke's new wife, knowing that everyone would be curious about the woman who'd married him so suddenly. She could imagine the whispers, the speculation, the judgment of women who'd known Sarah and would inevitably compare her to his beloved first wife. What was Sarah like at these gatherings? And Clara asked, trying to keep her voice casual. She loved them, Zeke replied. She was one of those people who could talk to anyone, make everyone feel welcome. Always right in the middle of things, laughing and dancing until the last song. Of course she was, Clara thought. Sarah had been part of this community for years, had belonged here in a way Clara never would. Sarah had been young and beautiful and beloved, while Clara was the stranger who'd married their neighbor after knowing him for all of 20 minutes. Do I have to go? Emma asked suddenly, her previous enthusiasm fading. What if people ask questions about everything? Clara reached across the table to squeeze the girl's hand. What kind of questions are you worried about, sweetheart? About why Papa married you so fast. About whether we like you. About, about Mama Sarah. Emma's voice grew smaller with each concern. Clara's heart ached for this child who'd already learned to worry about adult complications. Would it help if we talked about how to answer those questions? Emma nodded eagerly, and even Lily leaned forward with interest. Well, Clara said thoughtfully, if someone asks why your papa and I got married quickly, what's the honest answer? Because we needed a mama and you needed a family, Lily said promptly. That's right. And if they ask whether you like me, we love you, Emma said firmly, then blushed at her own boldness. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you, more than I can say. And if they ask about Mama Sarah, Emma pressed, the hardest question of all. Clara considered this carefully. Then you tell them the truth about that too, that you loved your mama very much, and you miss her every day, and that doesn't change just because you also love your new mama. Love isn't something you run out of, is it? Emma shook her head, her expression clearing. No, there's enough love for everyone. Exactly. That afternoon, Clara found herself standing in front of Sarah's wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear to the dance. Her own dresses were practical, serviceable things, perfect for domestic work, but hardly appropriate for a social event. Sarah's dresses, on the other hand, were exactly the sort of thing a young, pretty woman would wear to catch her husband's eye. Mama Clara? Emma appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Trying to figure out what to wear tomorrow night, Clara admitted. I don't have anything appropriate for a party. Emma came into the room and surveyed both wardrobes with the serious consideration of a fashion consultant. Mama Sarah's blue dress would fit you, she said eventually. It was her favorite for dancing. Clara's breath caught. Oh, sweetheart, I couldn't. That was your mama's special dress. But you're Papa's wife now, Emma said reasonably, and Mama Sarah would want you to look pretty for the dance. She always said a lady should have at least one dress that made her feel beautiful. Clara knelt to Emma's eye level. Are you sure? Really, truly sure you'd be comfortable with me wearing it? Emma nodded solemnly. Mama Sarah loved parties, and she loved Papa. She'd want him to be proud of his new wife. The next evening, Clara stood nervously by the wagon while Zeke helped the girls climb in. She'd spent extra time on her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style she hadn't attempted in years, and the blue dress rustled softly around her legs. Emma had insisted on lending her Sarah's pearl earrings to complete the outfit. You look beautiful, Zeke said quietly as he helped her into the wagon seat. There was something in his voice that made her look at him sharply, a warmth that went beyond polite compliment. Thank you, she managed, flustered by the intensity of his gaze. The Hendersons' farm was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting golden light over the yard, where tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. A makeshift dance floor had been built in the barn, and music drifted out into the evening air. Clara's courage nearly failed her as they approached the crowd. She could see people turning to look at them, conversations pausing as eyes focused on the new wife. She wanted nothing more than to climb back into the wagon and hide at home. Then she felt Zeke's hand at the small of her back, steady and reassuring. Emma slipped her small hand into Clara's free one, and Lily bounced excitedly at her other side. Whatever happened tonight, she wasn't facing it alone. Zeke! Called a voice from the crowd, and a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a warm smile approached them. So good to see you. And this must be Clara. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like you to meet my wife, Clara, Zeke said formally. Clara, this is Mary Patterson. She and her husband, Tom, are our nearest neighbors. Mary Patterson looked Clara up and down with the frankly assessing gaze of a woman taking measure of another woman. Clara held her breath, waiting for judgment. Well, Mary said finally, I can see why Zeke was smitten enough to marry you so quickly. You're just lovely, my dear. And that dress, Sarah always looked beautiful in blue, but it suits you just as well. Clara exhaled in relief. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. The girls insisted I wear it. Smart girls, Mary said approvingly. Now come along. I want to introduce you to some of the other ladies. We've all been dying of curiosity about the woman who finally caught our Zeke's eye again. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Clara found herself relaxing gradually as it became clear that the community's curiosity was largely benevolent. Most of the women seemed genuinely pleased that Zeke had remarried, and several commented approvingly on how well Emma and Lily looked. "Those girls have been too serious for too long," confided Martha Henderson, the hostess. "It's good to see them laughing again." "You've been good for this family, Clara." But not everyone was welcoming. Clara was acutely aware of a small group of younger women who whispered among themselves while shooting meaningful glances in her direction. She caught fragments of their conversation. "So sudden. Hardly knew her. Poor Sarah's barely cold in her grave." The comments stung, partly because they echoed her own insecurities, but Clara held her head high and focused on the people who were being kind. She wouldn't let a few unkind voices ruin the evening for the girls, who were clearly having a wonderful time. The real test came when the dancing began. Zeke appeared at her elbow as the fiddle music started, offering his arm formally. "May I have the honor of this dance, Mrs. Holloway?" Clara's heart skipped. She hadn't danced in years, not since before Robert's accident, but she could see Emma and Lily watching eagerly, and she knew this was important. The first time the community would see them together as a married couple. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Holloway." He led her onto the makeshift dance floor as other couples took their positions. The dance was a simple waltz, and Clara was relieved to discover that her body remembered the steps, even if her mind was nervous. Zeke was a good dancer, confident and sure, leading her through the steps with easy grace. As they moved together, Clara became aware of the watching eyes, but also of something else. The way Zeke looked at her, like she was the only woman in the room. The way his hand felt warm and right at her waist. The way their bodies seemed to fit together perfectly as they swayed to the music. "You're a beautiful dancer," he murmured as they turned. "I'm out of practice." "Couldn't tell." As the dance ended, Clara realized that something had shifted between them again. The way Zeke's hands lingered on her waist, the way he looked at her as he led her off the dance floor. It felt less like duty and more like genuine attraction. But her enjoyment was interrupted by a sharp voice cutting through the crowd's chatter. "Well, well, if it isn't the grieving widower and his replacement wife." Clara turned to see a beautiful woman in an elaborate green dress approaching them. She was young, probably no more than 25, with golden hair and the kind of figure that turned men's heads. Behind her trailed two other women, both wearing expressions of malicious anticipation. "Evelyn," Zeke said coolly, "I didn't realize you were back in town." "Just for a visit," the woman replied, her eyes fixed on Clara with undisguised hostility. "Though I must say, I'm surprised by what I found. When I heard you'd remarried so quickly, I expected, well, someone more suitable." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Clara felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Zeke stepped closer to her, his voice deadly quiet. "I'd be careful about your next words, Evelyn. Clara is my wife and deserves your respect." Evelyn laughed, a high, tinkling sound that drew attention from other guests. "Oh, Zeke, always so gallant. But surely you can see what everyone else is thinking. That poor Sarah hasn't been gone 2 years, and you've already replaced her with the first desperate woman willing to take on your motherless children." The crowd around them had gone silent, sensing drama. Clara could see Emma and Lily watching from across the room, their faces worried and confused. This was exactly what she'd feared. Being humiliated in front of the entire community, having her marriage reduced to a subject of gossip and speculation. But as she stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of watching eyes, Clara realized something important. She wasn't the same desperate woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 6 weeks ago. She was Mrs. Ezekiel Holloway, mother to Emma and Lily, partner to a good man who respected and valued her. She had every right to be here, every right to defend her place in this community. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "You're right about one thing, miss." "Mrs. Garrett," the woman replied with satisfaction. "Evelyn Garrett." "Mrs. Garrett, you're right that I was desperate when I married Zeke. I was a widow with nothing left in the world, no prospects and no hope. And yes, I married him partly for security, partly for shelter. But you know what I've learned in the past 6 weeks?" Clara paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say. "I've learned that sometimes the most practical decisions turn out to be the most blessed ones. I've learned that Emma and Lily are the most wonderful children I could ever hope to mother. And I've learned that Zeke Holloway is the kind of man who sees past desperation to the person underneath. She looked around at the watching crowd, meeting their eyes one by one. Maybe our marriage did start as a business arrangement, but it's become something more, a real family built on respect and care and growing love. And if that bothers you, Mrs. Garrett, then perhaps the problem isn't with my marriage, but with your own understanding of what makes a family work. The crowd was completely silent now. Then from somewhere in the back came the sound of slow clapping. It was joined by other hands, then more, until nearly everyone was applauding Clara's speech. Evelyn Garrett's face went white with fury, but she was clearly outnumbered. Without another word, she turned and stalked away, her friends trailing behind her like defeated soldiers. "Well said, Mrs. Holloway," called out Mary Patterson. "Very well said indeed." As they drove home under a canopy of stars, the girls sleeping in the back of the wagon, Clara and Zeke talked quietly about the evening's events. "I'm sorry you had to deal with Evelyn," Zeke said. "She's had her eye on me since Sarah died." "Thought she'd be the next Mrs. Holloway." "Ah," Clara said, understanding flooding through her. "That explains a lot." "She never had a chance," Zeke said firmly. "Even before I met you, she never had a chance. She's too selfish, too concerned with appearances. She wouldn't have lasted a week trying to be a mother to Emma and Lily." Clara was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Is that why you chose me? Because I could handle being a mother?" Zeke pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her in the moonlight. "Clara, I need you to understand something. If it had just been about finding any woman to fill that role, I could have chosen from several possibilities. There are plenty of widows in this territory who would have accepted my proposal." "Then why me?" "Because when I looked at you standing in that rain, soaked and lost and trying so hard to be brave, I saw something I recognized. Strength that comes from surviving hard things. The kind of character that gets stronger under pressure instead of breaking." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I chose you because I could see that you were the kind of woman who would love my daughters not because it was easy, but because it was right. The kind of woman who would stand up to someone like Evelyn Garrett, not for herself, but for her family." Clara's heart pounded at the intensity in his voice. "Zeke, I'm falling in love with you, Clara," he said quietly. "Not because you're convenient or available, but because you're extraordinary. And if tonight proved anything, it's that this community is lucky to have you as part of it." Clara stared at him in the moonlight, her mind reeling. Love? Real love, not just gratitude or growing affection. As they resumed their journey home, Clara's heart sang with a happiness she'd never expected to feel again. Maybe what had started as a marriage of convenience was becoming something much more precious. Maybe she was falling in love too. The weeks following the harvest dance brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in the Holloway household. Clara found herself paying closer attention to Zeke's movements around the ranch. The way his work shirt stretched across his shoulders when he carried feed to the animals. The sound of his laughter when Lily told one of her elaborate stories at dinner. She caught him watching her too, his eyes following her as she worked in the kitchen or helped the girls with their lessons. The tension wasn't uncomfortable, but it was there. A growing awareness between two people discovering that their practical marriage might be becoming something much less practical and much more profound. It was Emma who first noticed the change between her parents. "Papa smiles more now," she confided to Clara one morning as they worked together in Sarah's restored garden. The space had been transformed over the past month, with neat rows of late-season vegetables and carefully tended flower beds that would bloom again come spring. "Does he?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she helped Emma stake the tomato plants. And he hums sometimes when he's doing chores. He used to be so quiet all the time, like he was thinking sad thoughts. But now he seems lighter, I guess." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. Maybe he's just happier having help around the ranch. Emma gave her a look that was far too knowing for an 8-year-old. "Maybe. Or maybe he likes having you here for more than just the help." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at a fast clip. Clara straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized the rider. It was Dr. Morrison from town, and he was pushing his horse harder than a man would for a social call. "Mrs. Holloway," he called as he reined in his mount. "Thank goodness you're here. There's been an accident at the Sullivan place. Helen's gone into early labor after a fall. She's asking for you specifically." Clara's mind raced. She'd met Helen Sullivan only once at the harvest dance, but the woman had mentioned that she was expecting her first child and had seemed nervous about it. If she was asking for Clara during an emergency— "Emma, run get your papa," Clara said quickly, already heading toward the house. "Tell him Dr. Morrison needs me for an emergency." Within minutes, Clara had gathered the supplies she'd learned to keep on hand: clean linens, herbs for tea, a bottle of laudanum she'd bought from the doctor himself. Her own mother had taught her basic healing skills, and over the years she'd served as midwife and nurse to neighbors who couldn't afford professional medical care. "Are you sure about this?" Zeke asked as he helped her into Dr. Morrison's buggy. "Helen Sullivan barely knows you." "She knows I helped bring Lily through her fever," Clara replied. "And she knows I've had experience with birthing and healing. Sometimes that's enough." The Sullivan place was in chaos when they arrived. Helen was lying in her bed, pale and frightened, while her husband paced the floor like a caged animal. The accident, a fall down their porch steps while hanging laundry, had sent her into early labor at just 7 months along. "Mrs. Holloway," Helen gasped when Clara entered the room. "Thank God you came. The baby— it's too early, but it won't stop coming." Clara immediately took charge with the calm competence that had impressed Zeke during Lily's illness. She sent Mr. Sullivan to boil water and gather clean linens, directed Dr. Morrison in preparing his instruments, and settled beside Helen's bed with the steady presence of someone who'd seen difficult births before. For the next 6 hours, Clara barely left Helen's side. The birth was complicated. The baby was indeed early and small, and Helen was exhausted from the trauma of the fall. But Clara's steady encouragement, her knowledge of positioning and breathing, and her absolute refusal to panic helped both mother and doctor through the crisis. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny but healthy son with strong lungs and fighting spirit, Clara felt the familiar rush of joy that came from helping bring new life into the world. "He's beautiful," she told Helen, who was crying with relief as she held her son. "Small but perfect. He's going to be just fine." Dr. Morrison cleaned his hands and turned to Clara with obvious respect. "Mrs. Holloway, I don't know how you did it, but you probably saved both their lives today. That was some of the finest midwifery I've ever witnessed." Clara blushed at the praise. "I just did what needed doing." "You did considerably more than that. Have you considered— well, this community could use someone with your skills. Women who know what they're doing at births are rarer than gold out here." It was nearly dark when Clara finally returned home, exhausted but exhilarated by the day's events. She found Zeke waiting on the porch, pacing with worry. "How did it go?" he asked, immediately helping her down from the buggy. "Mother and baby are both fine," Clara said, swaying slightly with fatigue. "It was touch and go for a while, but—" She didn't finish the sentence because suddenly Zeke's arms were around her, pulling her against his chest in a fierce embrace that had nothing to do with their business arrangement and everything to do with the fear he'd felt all day. "I was so worried," he murmured into her hair. "When you didn't come back, when it got dark—" Clara found herself melting into his embrace, her face pressed against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and sunshine, and something uniquely Zeke. This was the first time he'd held her like this, and she was amazed by how right it felt, how perfectly she fit against him. "I'm fine," she whispered. "We're all fine." When he finally pulled back to look at her, Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was the look of a man who'd realized he couldn't bear to lose what he'd found. "Clara," he said softly, his hands still resting on her shoulders, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "Today, when you were gone, when I didn't know if something might have happened to you, I realized that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the girls needing a mother." Clara's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I need you too, not just as their mother, not just as my partner in running this household. I need you as my wife, my real wife." Before Clara could respond, the front door burst open and Emma and Lily came running out. "Mama Clara!" Lily cried, launching herself into Clara's arms. We were so worried. Papa made us soup for supper, but it was terrible. Hey now, Zeke protested with mock offense. That soup wasn't that bad. Yes, it was, Papa, Emma said seriously, but she was smiling as she hugged Clara tightly. We're just glad you're home safe. As they went inside together, Clara's mind was spinning from Zeke's words. Had he really said he needed her as his real wife? What did that mean? And why did the thought make her heart race with something that felt suspiciously like joy? That night, after the girls were tucked safely in bed, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She stood at her bedroom window looking out at the moonlit ranch, thinking about everything that had changed since she'd stepped off that stagecoach 2 months ago. She'd come here seeking survival and had found so much more. She'd found purpose, family, belonging, and now perhaps she'd found love. Real, deep, lasting love with a man who saw her not as a convenient solution to his problems, but as someone essential to his happiness. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer to Clara's question came sooner than she expected, in the form of a crisis that would test everything they'd built together. It started with a letter that arrived on a gray October morning, delivered by a rider who looked like he'd been traveling hard. Clara was hanging laundry when Zeke came out of the house, his face pale as ash, the opened letter trembling in his hands. What is it? She asked, immediately dropping the wet sheet she'd been pinning to the line. It's from my brother-in-law, Sarah's brother Marcus, Zeke said, his voice hollow. He's coming here. Says he's heard I've remarried and wants to evaluate the situation. Clara's blood ran cold. Evaluate what situation? Whether the girls are being properly cared for, whether they'd be better off with him and his wife in Denver. Zeke's jaw clenched. He says he's concerned about them being raised by a stranger. The implications hit Clara like a physical blow. Marcus could challenge Zeke's custody of his own daughters, claim that a hasty remarriage to a woman he barely knew wasn't in their best interests. In territorial courts, blood relatives often had significant influence, especially when they could afford good lawyers. When is he arriving? Clara managed to ask. Tomorrow. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Clara and Zeke sat in the kitchen making plans. The house had never looked better. Clara's months of careful tending had transformed it into a warm, welcoming home. But would it be enough to convince a skeptical relative that the children were thriving? Tell me about Marcus, Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. He's Sarah's older brother. Never approved of her marrying a simple rancher instead of staying in Denver society. After she died. Zeke paused, running a hand through his hair. He wanted me to send the girls to him then. Said they needed proper education, proper society, proper feminine influence. But you refused. I couldn't bear to lose them too. They're all I have left of Sarah, and they're my daughters. But Clara, if he can convince a judge that our marriage is just a sham, that you're not a fit mother, then we make sure he can't, Clara said firmly, though her heart was pounding with fear. But what if Marcus was right? What if she wasn't enough? She was just a widow who'd married a stranger out of desperation. She had no education, no social standing, no qualifications beyond love and determination. Would that be enough to keep Emma and Lily safe? The next afternoon, Marcus Whitfield arrived in a fancy carriage with brass fittings, driven by a uniformed coachman. He was a tall, well-dressed man in his 40s, with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to deference. His wife Constance was equally elegant, wearing a traveling dress that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. Ezekiel, Marcus said coolly as he stepped down from the carriage, you're looking well. Marcus, Constance Zeke's voice was carefully neutral. This is my wife, Clara. Marcus's gaze swept over Clara with undisguised assessment. She dressed carefully in her best day dress and pinned her hair in the most elegant style she could manage, but she felt shabby and inadequate under his scrutiny. Mrs. Holloway, he said with minimal courtesy, I trust you understand why we've come. To see Emma and Lily, Clara replied steadily. They'll be delighted to see their aunt and uncle. But the children's reaction was more reserved than Clara had hoped. They remembered Marcus and Constance, but it had been over a year since they'd visited, and both girls stayed close to Clara's side as they showed their relatives around the ranch. The house looks different, Constance observed as they toured the parlor. Her tone suggested the changes weren't necessarily improvements. Mama Clara fixed everything up, Lily said proudly. She made curtains and planted flowers and taught Emma how to make Mama Sarah's biscuits even better. Clara's heart warmed at Lily's loyalty, but she noticed Marcus's frown at the casual way his niece called her Mama Clara. The real confrontation came that evening, after the girls had been sent to bed. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. Ezekiel, I'll be direct. When I heard you'd remarried so hastily to a woman you barely knew, I became concerned about my niece's welfare. The girls are perfectly happy and healthy, Zeke replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. Are they? Or have you simply convinced yourself that this arrangement is adequate? Marcus's gaze shifted to Clara. Mrs. Holloway, what qualifications do you have for raising my sister's children? Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. I love them. I care for them. I've made their happiness and welfare my highest priority. Love, Marcus repeated dismissively. What about education? Social graces? Proper moral instruction? Can you teach them to be ladies, or are you raising them to be frontier farm girls? There's nothing wrong with frontier farm girl, Clara said, her temper beginning to rise. Emma and Lily are smart, kind, well-behaved children who deserve better than this isolated existence with a stepmother who married their father for convenience? Marcus interrupted. In Denver, they would have access to proper schools, cultural refinement, social connections that could benefit them throughout their lives. They would have everything except what they need most, Clara shot back, forgetting caution. A father who adores them and a family that wants them for who they are, not who you think they should become. The argument was interrupted by a small sound from the stairway. Emma stood there in her nightgown, tears streaming down her face. Emma, sweetheart, Clara began, but the little girl ran to her, burying her face against Clara's shoulder. I don't want to go to Denver, Emma sobbed. I want to stay here with you and Papa and Lily. You're our mama now. We don't want anyone else. Clara's arms tightened around the child and she looked directly at Marcus. Does that sound like an unhappy child to you? But Marcus wasn't finished. Children often don't know what's best for them. It's the responsibility of adults to make proper decisions for their future. Their future is here, Zeke said, his voice deadly quiet, with their family. Is it? Marcus pulled out an official-looking document. This is a petition for custody signed by a judge in Denver. All I have to do is present evidence that this marriage is a fraud, that these children are not receiving proper care, and I can take them home with me. The room fell silent except for Emma's muffled sobs against Clara's shoulder. Then Clara stood, gently moving Emma behind her, and faced Marcus with a calm that surprised even herself. Mr. Whitfield, she said quietly, you want evidence that this marriage is real? That these children are loved and cared for? Then look around you. Look at this house, this home we've built together. Look at your nieces, not as objects to be won or lost, but as the happy, healthy, beloved children they are. She moved to stand beside Zeke, taking his hand. Yes, our marriage began as a practical arrangement, but it became something more, a partnership, a family, a love so deep it changed all our lives. And if you think for one moment that I would let you take these children away from the only real home they've known since they lost their mother, then you don't understand what love really means. Zeke's hand squeezed hers, and she saw something blazing in his eyes that took her breath away. The lady's right, he said, his voice strong and clear. This is our family, Marcus, and we'll fight for it with everything we have. As the confrontation continued into the night, Clara realized that whatever happened, she and Zeke were no longer just partners in a convenient arrangement. They were husband and wife in every way that mattered, ready to defend their love and their family against anyone who threatened to tear them apart. The custody battle that Marcus Whitfield threatened never came to pass, because the next morning, something extraordinary happened that changed everything. Dr. Morrison arrived at dawn with news that Helen Sullivan had gone into complications from her recent birth, and once again, she was asking specifically for Clara. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 other women from town had sent word that they too needed Clara's help with various medical emergencies. As Clara prepared to leave, Emma made a declaration that would echo through the courthouse in Denver. Uncle Marcus, you want to know if Mama Clara is good enough to raise us? Ask the whole town. Ask Mrs. Sullivan, whose baby wouldn't be alive without her. Ask the Patterson family, whose children she nursed through scarlet fever. Ask anyone in Broken Creek. They'll tell you we have the best mama in the whole territory. Marcus Whitfield found himself facing not just a family defending their right to stay together, but an entire community willing to testify to Clara's character, skill, and devotion. Faced with overwhelming evidence that his nieces were not just surviving, but thriving, he quietly withdrew his petition and returned to Denver. 6 months later, as spring painted the Colorado hills green and gold, Clara stood in Sarah's garden, now truly her garden, watching Zeke teach Lily to ride while Emma helped her tend the vegetables. The practical marriage that had begun with a desperate handshake had become something neither of them could have imagined. "Any regrets?" Zeke asked that evening as they sat on their porch, his arm around her shoulders, their daughters playing at their feet. Clara thought about the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 8 months ago, desperate, alone, with nothing but hope and determination. Now she was surrounded by love, respected in her community, essential to the happiness of 3 people who meant everything to her. "Only one," she said, smiling up at her husband. "What's that?" "That I waited so long to find you all." As the stars appeared overhead and laughter filled the air around them, Clara realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't begin with passion or poetry. Sometimes they begin with 2 people brave enough to take a chance on each other, to build something real from the broken pieces of their separate lives. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they last forever. What did you think of Clara and Zeke's extraordinary love story? Have you ever taken a leap of faith that changed your entire life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories for more incredible tales of love, courage, and new beginnings on America's frontier. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just inspire your own leap of faith. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most practical decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations.